bring in Jayson Stark of The Athletic. Hey there. You look happy.
How are we doing there, boys?
Oh, we're doing well. Last place in the AL East, as we all predicted. What could go?
Right.
What could go wrong? Hey, the Marlins trading Luis Arias. I'm going to ask you the same question we asked Ryan Dempster. You're an old former baseball beat guy, and didn't we always say that it's like, wouldn't we look at May 6th back in the day and go, man, it's too early to make the type of deal that type of deal. We're still in the let's kind of make sure that our spring training evaluation was right stage of things. You're not supposed to do this in May 6th, are you?
Hey, how about Peter Bendix saying it was unlikely his team was going to make the playoffs? You think? They were 8-26 at the time. I could have told him that.
I keep wondering what's poor Chris Getz going to do in Chicago? What's he going to do now? He's got to come out and kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, well, like here's the problem with if you sort of gone through these teams, Marlins, White Sox, Rockies, there's not a lot to trade on those teams.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Marlins would have more to trade than anybody. And Luis Arias was a really interesting guy to dangle out there. There are a lot of really interesting aspects to this deal. One of them was the Marlins paying all of this guy's salary to sweeten the prospect pot. Think about it. The Marlins just paid all of the salary of the guy they traded. We're upside down, aren't we?
Well, that's what I was thinking. If I'm a Marlins fan, I don't know what would upset me more: the fact that my GM has waved the white flag while the Florida Panthers are still in the playoffs, frankly, or the fact that my team that generally doesn't pay anybody is paying a guy to play someplace else. I don't know. Is he going to be their highest paid player this year still?
If they're paying all the salary, then I think that's how it worked out. I'd have to go through the payroll, but I think that's how it works out. They did it to get better prospects,
right?
And they made out okay in that trade. So I understand that. Peter Bendix was not the general manager when they acquired Luis Arias. So that plays into this too. Not really his type of player, although a guy who actually puts the bat on the ball and doesn't swing and miss should be every team's kind of player. But that aside, I want you to think about this from the big picture. Think about the history of baseball in Miami, in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Every time they've made the postseason, doesn't it feel like they started a sell-off 15 minutes later?
Yep.
Right? Like, isn't that a tough way to build and sustain a fan base? I would just have a hard time always doing that.
Jason, when you speak of a sell-off, and I don't want to say that the Blue Jays are going to do that, but it's sure intriguing getting off to the slow start that they've gotten off to. Obviously, offensively, they're not scoring a ton of runs, but now all of a sudden the bullpen's not real good. If the bullpen's not real good and the lineup consistently is not real good, do you see the Blue Jays doing something sooner than later with one of their bigger players, starting probably with, say, Bo Bichette?
Sooner than later, I would really be surprised by that. Let me just start by saying I was sitting with some scouts one night at the ballpark in Philly. This would have been a couple weeks ago. Okay. One of them had just come from seeing the Blue Jays. Here's what he told me. He said, when I saw them last year, I thought that was the most talented team in the league. It was the most talented team that I saw. And then they never played to that level. And then he said, I thought the same thing this year, but I'm afraid to buy into them. And so that's coming from somebody who works in the game, and I don't blame anyone for feeling exactly that way. We've broken down the parts of this engine before. Best defense in the league, should be one of the best rotations in the league now that Gausman has his health and his act together again. And then you start looking at the lineup and think they should hit. They have talented players. They have a good process. It makes no sense that they would be 12th in the league in runs scored. And here's the thing, Kevin. I think it makes no sense to them, right? So the way they're built, when you think about what they have invested in this team and who they haven't invested in, I don't think they're wired to break this up sooner than later. Maybe at some point, but sooner, no.
Jayson, what do you think they do with George Springer?
I don't know how movable he is. I think the guy to move is Vlad. I do. Talked about this on MLB Network the other day, and I know that's tough to contemplate, but we put up his numbers since the beginning of 2023, and it's frightening what an ordinary player he has been. I think he was 47th in the sport in homers since the beginning of last year, and 70 something in slugging and 100 something in OPS. And this is Vlad we're talking about, Vlad Guerrero. And so if he's just an average player and you've got no traction toward signing him, keeping him, extending him, he's 25 years old with a year and a half to go. Like, isn't that the guy to think about moving?
Yeah. I mean, that would be the obvious choice, right?
I mean, either of those two, either him or Bo. But I still think that
here's why I think Vlad. Okay, if you look inside the data, his hard hit rate is something like 58%, which means the bat speed's still there. He just can't get the ball in the air. You don't think there are teams out there that look at Vladdy and think, "Oh, we can fix him"?
Oh yeah, we can reinvent the wheel. Yeah,
happens all the time.
I just wonder what it would take for Ross to say, "Okay, I'll do that." I mean, let's be honest. Like how they've handled the team, the way the season ended last year, how you heard Ross talk about the manager and the team going, out of the season last year, what they didn't do in the offseason to make the team better. Like, what would it take to get rid of one of those two to keep a fan base? I don't want to say happy, but there's a word in there that I think you could probably, there you go, and actually put fannies in the seats. I just wonder what you could get for them, I think is the question.
I think you do well for both of them. Both of them. Are they prepared to announce to the world that the Vladdy and Bo era, or at least the Vladdy and Bo window, is closed, over? Are they? That's again, not right now with nearly 130 games to go. They're far from buried. They're looking at a similar scenario to last year and trying to get into one of those wild card spots, because 8 games behind the Orioles is an ominous place to be on May 6th as the Orioles start to get healthy. But they're far from buried. They're too talented. It's just hard to understand why they keep playing the way they're playing. This is a topic for 7-8 weeks from now, more than now. But it's something to think about.
Yep. Your recent column, What We Learned in April Across MLB, and got us talking. One of the things we've been kind of throwing around here is the AL Central and how that shakes out. I mean, we were just talking about how, if you're a Jays fan following the Jays, you got to follow the AL Central now, because this may be a year where you only have 2 teams come out of the East, two playoff teams. Which is the most real team to you in the AL Central right now? Which of those 4 is that's a real thing. That's not fool's gold. That's not going to go away. That's legit.
Yeah, that's a good way to ask it. I think if you really look at the Tigers and Royals, it's not their time. Mm-hmm. They weren't really planning on this year to be their time. I think both of them, as they constructed their team, thought to themselves, reminded themselves, we're not in the AL East. We're in the AL Central. Is it going to take 97 wins to win our division? It's not. So let's build an 84-ish win team and maybe get lucky, and we'll see what happens. That might be enough. It was what Fangraphs actually projected. The other two teams are a little different. The Twins are built to win. I don't know if they have enough pitching to win, but the team on the field is definitely more built to win than the Royals and Tigers.
Yeah.
The Guardians, it's just what they do. They always find a way to do less or more with less. And they're doing it again. Like I would have thought when they lost Shane Bieber and Terry Francona was not pictured, like that was not a playoff team. But you have to convince them of that. It's just built into their culture. But if you look at the talent of those two teams and compare it to the depth of the AL East, if you even compare it to Seattle, Texas, I don't know whether it include Houston or not. There's a gap in talent. So I am not in the school that says there's going to be two AL Central playoff teams. I'm just not there.
Jayson, biggest takeaway first month and a half of the season. What is it?
Well, I'm amazed by Shohei. I'm amazed. We just had Dave Roberts on our Starkfield podcast. This will drop later this afternoon. And we were talking about this. How can a guy change teams, change leagues, sign the biggest contract in the history of sports, have his world blown up by having the guy he spends 24 hours a day with basically getting hauled away in balls and chains and be better? But that's happened. Yeah. Juan Soto in New York, that is working. That has happened. And then you've got this group of guys who are just announcing to all of us that they're superstars. They're all shortstops. Bobby Witt Jr., L.A. De La Cruz, Gunnar Henderson. Like I would start with those three takeaways. We could pick apart a lot of stuff that shocked us and disappointed us in April, but if you're talking about what was the best stuff we saw, I talk about those guys.
You also made an interesting point because in the past, whenever a player has shown up late for spring training or signed late, we've kind of gone, he's probably working out in his zone. He's got a gym and he's got a training partner and it'll be fine. And once the season rolls around, he'll hit the ground running. It is kind of nice to know when you look at, guys like Snell and Chapman and that maybe, and it's great for folks with expense accounts that get sent to spring training by their organization, that maybe spring training does matter again, right? Maybe it's just not the whole glorified BP that some of us old curmudgeons kind of make it out to be. Maybe you need it, actually.
Kevin, do you notice that Jeff was a guy who used to get paid to go to spring training every year and thought they're going to catch on to this one year? So he seized on the part of that item that said, don't get misled by what you think spring training is. It really matters.
It matters.
So you better send me next year. Okay. So
it's like the line from Blazing Saddles.
What?
It's like the line from Blazing Saddles. Gentlemen, we've got to protect our phony baloney jobs.
I don't know if it matters for the players to be there, but Jeff, Blair, and I need to be in spring
Damn right.
training. Yeah. So, it really does have some significance, especially if you're going to sign in the middle of March or the end of March. It's just not enough time to not just build up for the season, but do all the other stuff that goes with changing teams. You've got new teammates. You need to find a place to live. You might be switching positions for all we know. There's a lot that goes into it. And so, all these guys that I mentioned, they're all Scott Boras clients.
Right.
And all the teams heard from Scott was, don't worry, we got them in here in the lab, or we got them here in Camp Boras, and they'll be fine. They're throwing, they're hitting. They'll be fine. What we've seen so far tells us that's not true. And I went back and looked at the body of work of players who signed in March over the last 5, 6 years, none of them had the season they were signed to have. Not one. And there's a moral in that story. I just saw the Giants the other day, Jeff. They signed Blake Snell. Okay. He's been brutal, and he's hurt. And maybe he might not win a game till July. And then that means you're paying him $30 million and he's going to make like 14 starts.
Yeah.
Plus, he's going to pick up his option. He's not going to opt out.
Exactly.
You got another year of $30 million for that guy.
Yeah.
Jason, how about
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I got to ask you about the Phillies, and the Jays are about to play the Phillies. And I tried, when I was looking at the Phillies, to find a weakness. I can't find one. Can you give me one?
Trey Turner just got hurt.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. That's one of the best teams in baseball.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if they're better than the Braves and Dodgers, but I think my top 3 would start there with Baltimore in there somewhere. And you know, the funny thing is, I saw a lot of the Phillies and a lot of the Jays this spring. And if you had asked me which team had the better spring, which team was more prepared to get off to a great start, I'd have said the Blue Jays. And then the opposite has happened. Baseball's a weird sport. You know, both teams are built to win, and only one of them is winning. But the Phillies looked like the Jays looked last year and the year before that at this time. And remember how it ended up, which is a reminder of how long a baseball season is. But this is their best team, the Phillies. It's their best roster, the most complete roster. And, you know, one of the things that Dave Dombrowski said over the offseason was he normally wouldn't run it back with a team that didn't win, that came up short. But he was so struck by the motivation level of the group that he wasn't worried about that at all. And so he started running through it, you know, because if you remember, MLB.com, right before the season started, was breaking down every category of every team. Best rotation, Phillies. Best lineup, Phillies. Best bullpen, Phillies. Best defense. They were one of the top 5.
Right.
That was a switch. So you tell me, is there something they don't do? I don't see it. If they start getting hit with more injuries like the Trey Turner injury, that would be an issue. But that's true of every team.
Yep. Yeah, and it seems to me that the emergence of Ranger Suarez has kind of it's brought them a little extra wiggle room too for any injuries to their position players, because he's been remarkable. I mean, he's
as good as anybody. He's teased them with that for several years now, but he actually made it through a whole spring training, wasn't late, wasn't hurt. And there was something about that guy in the spring where you saw that commitment to being what he can be for 6 months. Haven't you always thought there are certain players who aren't built for the marathon?
Yep.
You know, they're talented and they tease you, but 6 months is a long time to be great. And it's what separates the great players from everybody else. The great players come to play or pitch with focus and energy every time they're out there. And a lot of people can't do it. Ranger Suarez is trying to prove this year he's one of the guys who can do it. And so if he's just pitcher of the month and they have 3 number 1 type starters, who has that?
Not many.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if maybe when you look at Ranger Suarez, if last year's postseason wasn't, it seems it was really good for him. You know, like every now and then I think you see a guy in the postseason and you go, that is going to change him just for whatever reason. And I kind of got that impression last year. And then you see the way he started this year. It's almost like he got a little confidence last year in the postseason.
Well, I mean, he was really great in 22, and he was really good last year until the last start. Remember when that start was? It was Game 7 of the NLCS.
Right.
His team needed to win, and he wasn't good enough that night. And he has talked about that, about he can't let that happen again. And so it was good for him in every way. Got a sense of how good he can be, but also a sense of what it means to his team, the importance he can have to everybody that he plays with if he's what he's supposed to be. And that's a really important lesson in the growth of any player.
Yeah.
Jayson, really good of you to do this, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Good
buddy.
to see you as always.
Always enjoy it, my friends.